Hey there, everybody. Jeff Dalick here with our Curious World, bringing you another story of the mysterious, the unexplained, and the just plain weird. Subject I want to talk about today is whether extraterrestrials pose a threat to Earth. Beyond it being the plot to many alien invasion movies over the years and a concern that many people have to this day, is such a fear well founded, or is it just another of the many overblown threats we face as a society? Well, let's get into it. In 2010, world-renowned astrophysicist Stephen Hawkings described the dangers of first contact with aliens in a Discovery Channel documentary, in which he stated if aliens visit us, the outcome will be much as when Columbus landed in America, which didn't turn out well for the Native Americans. He then added, "We only have to look at ourselves to see how intelligent life might develop into something we wouldn't want to meet." We don't know much about aliens, but we do know about humans. If you look at history, contact between humans and less intelligent organisms have often been disastrous from their point of view, and encounters between civilizations with advanced versus primitive technologies have gone badly for the less advanced. So how about it? Is Hawkins right? Are we putting ourselves in danger by trying to contact potential alien civilizations through projects like SETI and such? Further, would they be as dangerous as Hawkins maintains? Well, let's look at the possibilities. First, it should be remembered that while Professor Hawkins was a brilliant astrophysicist and one of the great minds of our times, his views about potentially malicious alien life lies outside his field of expertise, and as such remains purely his personal opinion. That's not to say he may not be correct. I merely caution that one would be ill-advised to accept anything a scientist opines that lies outside their field of expertise with authority. There's a tendency among humans to assign a sort of universal wisdom to men of science, as though their genius is all-inclusive and even speaks to questions beyond their field with the same authority as their scientific theories do. But more importantly, let's look more closely at his words. Hawkins maintains that encounters between advanced civilizations and more primitive societies did, in his words, go badly for the less advanced culture. Obviously, such as we saw with the European conquest of the Americas. This is an understatement and an undeniable fact of history, but what he fails to take into account is that those atrocities took place hundreds of years ago at a time when humanity was in a far more primitive state of development. At that time, expanding a nation's riches through colonization was the norm, and the quest to civilize the heathens was considered practically a God-ordained duty. It was a time when things like slavery and near continual wars of conquest were not only commonplace, but even considered by many to be acceptable. But surely we aren't those people today. Haven't we evolved beyond such mindsets for the most part over the last 500 years? Today, the idea of simply seizing territory for its natural resources, forcibly displacing an indigenous population, enslaving an entire people, or exterminating a race is almost universally considered unacceptable. Well, except maybe in Russia. Suggesting that we have evolved both as a civilization and as a people. We haven't created an earthly utopia, of course, but when compared to the world of 500 years ago, or even the world of a century ago, we would be hard-pressed to maintain the illusion that we haven't evolved to a considerable degree. We still have a long ways to go, of course, but no one can credibly deny that we haven't made progress. If that's the case with humanity, then wouldn't that also be true with sentient alien civilizations as well? Might they not similarly evolve spiritually and morally as they became more technologically advanced, much as we appear to be doing today? If Hawkins wants to use humanity's past transgressions as a measuring stick for what an alien world might do to us, then our improved, if not yet perfected, current state of spiritual evolution should also serve as evidence that extraterrestrial life should similarly show evidence of evolving as well. Otherwise, we are left with the prospect that only humans are capable of making spiritual, emotional, and moral progress, which seems to be a presumptuous position to maintain. As such, the case can be made that for an alien race to survive the destructive potential contained within its own technology, it must evolve spiritually as well, which suggests that any spacefaring alien races we encounter would inevitably have to be not only centuries or even thousands of years ahead of us in terms of technological development, but in terms of spiritual development as well. In other words, for them to have survived their own progression to the stars, they should be as enlightened as they are powerful. Does that mean it would be impossible for there to be a race of spacefaring warlike beings out there? Well, not necessarily, but I suspect it would be difficult to see how such a race would have ever gotten that far. Why? Well, let's look at an example of what a potential spacefaring warrior race would look like from the famous TV series Star Trek. While I recognize the show to have been a work of fiction and not necessarily an accurate portrayal of what a warlike alien race might really be like, it did introduce us to a number of fictitious warlike races that contested the Federation as it expanded deeper into the galaxy. None were more famous, however, than the nefarious Klingons, a militant race that sees war as a glorious adventure and enthusiastically embraces the prospect of dying in combat, which makes them a formidable enemy. If you think about it, though, wouldn't such a militaristic philosophy likely result in the Klingons eventually destroying themselves long before they reach the stars, through both the internal power struggles and continual wars among themselves? And even if they did somehow manage to survive long enough to acquire interstellar capabilities, how long would it have been before they encountered an alien race more advanced in itself and find itself quickly outmatched and possibly even exterminated? In other words, without spiritual enlightenment and the wisdom that comes with it, the Klingons would have long ago fallen upon their own swords and rendered themselves extinct. As such, I suspect it far more likely that most alien races would be peaceful rather than warlike, and likely see war as a last resort, or maybe have other means of defending themselves that doesn't include the use of force. I don't know that for a fact, of course, but I don't think it's an unreasonable supposition either. Of course, it's always possible that there could be warlike races out there, but even if there are, I doubt they'd be able to come to Earth such as they did in the movie Independence Day and lay waste to our planet, and for two very good reasons. For the first of these reasons, we must return once again to Star Trek for our answer. Star Trek's creator, Gene Roddenberry, included one very interesting element to his Trekkie universe with the introduction of something called the Prime Directive. Though frequently violated, especially in the original series, it was a sort of compact that forbade any of the Federation races from interfering in the development of whatever sentient cultures they may come across in their travels. They could still study, observe, and monitor such races, but they couldn't make contact or otherwise make themselves known to them, at least until they reached the point of achieving warp capability. Isn't it possible that such an agreement is in effect not just in Roddenberry's world of Star Trek, but in reality as well? In fact, wouldn't it make sense that something akin to this Prime Directive likely exists among the sentient races out there as well, in which they mutually agree to restrict themselves to merely observing developing civilizations such as our own until such time that it achieves interstellar capabilities, assuming it survives long enough to make it that technological jump, at which time they may have some protocol in place to initiate first contact. Until then, however, they will remain hidden from us, another feat that should be easily within their capabilities, until such a time as they decide to show themselves to us. Wouldn't we do the same if we came across such civilizations were we to one day achieve spacefaring technologies? It's something to think about. Of course, why would a warlike race choose to follow such an agreement? Well, it may not have a choice, which is the second reason I think we don't need to fear being conquered by a Klingon-like race, and that reason also comes from Star Trek. One aspect of the show I always found questionable was why all the races that inhabited Roddenberry's universe seemed to possess the roughly equivalent level of technology. The Federation, the Vulcans, the Klingons, the Romulans, even the Ferengi all demonstrated roughly the same capabilities in terms of weaponry, defenses, and even warp speed, making for a universe in which parity seemed to be the rule. Although some of them possessed a few technological advantages over their adversaries, the famous cloaking device, for example, for the most part, none had any clear-cut advantage over their adversaries in a one-on-one duel. This seems most unlikely. If there is even one space-faring sentient race out there, Logic dictates that there must be hundreds or even thousands of such races, and since each would have developed independently of each other and at different rates and times in the past, some of these races should be far more technologically advanced than others. In effect, there should exist a sort of galactic hierarchy, with some races being considered almost godlike in their capabilities when compared to the other lesser developed races, making anything approaching true parity not only rare but nearly impossible. It would be these super races, perhaps millions of years old, possessing a level of technology we would look upon as almost magical, that would see to it that this prime directive is strictly adhered to. Therefore, even if there were a Klingon-like race out there, it would be powerless to pillage and destroy, as long as these more advanced guardian races were around to keep them in check. But why would such an advanced race bother to protect us or even care about what happens to us at all? In the same interview quoted earlier, Hawkings also stated that a civilization reading one of our messages could be billions of years ahead of us. If so, they will be vastly more powerful and may not see us as any more valuable than we see bacteria. While I suppose that's always a possibility, I submit that exactly the opposite would be the case. Such a highly spiritually evolved race would likely maintain respect for all life in whatever form it takes or level of development it is at. After all, even us primitive humans are coming to respect nature and appreciate the value of all life, even the most primitive and simplest forms, leaving me to suspect that those advanced races out there would also hold life as sacred and so have a moral and ethical stake in preserving it from harm. This would be especially true of maturing civilizations like our own, especially if such are comparatively rare in the universe. For all we know, developing civilizations like ours may exist in just 1 in a million star systems, making Earth one of the more interesting planets for 1,000 light years in either direction. We may be little more than a child race to them, but likely they see in us the seed of eventual greatness that needs to be protected and nurtured, as well as studied. For in observing us, they may well be better able to understand their own evolutionary progression. Aside from the reasons that an alien race would be unlikely to attack us because of possible non-interference protocols and protection from more advanced races, there's the question of what reasons a spacefaring extraterrestrial race would have for conquering Earth in the first place. After all, aliens would need to travel hundreds or even thousands of light years just to get here, so what could we have that would induce them to pursue such a major undertaking? Well, the first possibility is that they perceive us as some kind of a threat to them. Ufologists are quick to point out that the appearance of flying saucers began very soon after we detonated the first atomic bombs in 1945, suggesting they didn't start showing any real interest until we started to become capable of producing weapons that were truly capable of ending all life on the planet. So do our vast nuclear arsenals and warlike tendencies constitute some sort of existential threat to an alien race? Not at all. Our nuclear arsenals, as destructive as they are, would be mere flea bites compared to what sort of destructive weaponry a race hundreds or even thousands of years ahead of our own might possess. While our nuclear weapons might pose a local threat to their vessels, especially if one were detonated close to one of their craft, they would have no more to fear from our arsenals of destruction than a modern army would have of a tribe of Amazon warriors outfitted with spears and poison arrows. While our vast nuclear arsenals, along with our tendency to panic when we perceive a threat and use such weapons against them were they to make themselves known to us, might prove problematic, I suspect alien races would have little to worry about from our own warlike tendencies. I also further suspect that they possess the technologies capable of rendering our arsenals inoperable as well, but that's a subject for another video. The more likely scenario is that we have something they want, such as rare earth metals, and they are willing to take it by force. While this at least makes a bit more sense, it fails to recognize the fact that there is nothing unique about our planet in regards to its composition. It is composed of many of the same elements and materials that can be found in the billions or even trillions of other planets, moons, and asteroids out there, making one wonder why they would travel all that distance to mine Earth when they could easily find a more suitable chunk of rock closer to home to mine, and one on which they wouldn't need to eradicate all life in the process. But let us suppose, for the sake of argument, that there is an element or a compound of some kind on this planet that is truly rare and of immense value to spacefaring races. The question that such a prospect brings up is, why eradicate life on this planet to get to it? They could simply arrive with their fleet of mining vessels, announce they are going to extract the necessary materials, and tell us not to intervene. Since they're not leveling entire cities, it would be difficult to justify the use of force against them. And even if we did decide to resist, what could we do to realistically stop them? On the other hand, such beings could be spiritually evolved enough that they might be willing to cut a deal. Perhaps one of their representatives will speak before the United Nations and say, "Permit us to extract the elements we require without interference, and we'll give you advanced medical knowledge that will practically eradicate disease on your planet." Would you be willing to let them extract whatever it is they might want in exchange for a proven cure for cancer, diabetes, or Alzheimer's? It's an interesting possibility. Some have suggested that aliens aren't here to destroy us, but to enslave us. The idea is that they will use us puny humans to strip the Earth of anything of value, but this makes even less sense. That would seem to be the most primitive and least effective way of acquiring what they want. Slavery was practiced largely because the means of doing the mundane task could only be accomplished through human sweat and muscle. But once the industrial age hit, humans soon invented machines that could do those chores much more quickly and efficiently, rendering slavery less cost-effective and ensuring its eventual demise. As such, if a civilization wanted to rape our planet of whatever elements it wanted, they would undoubtedly have devices to perform such tasks, which would be far more effective and faster than what could be done by even billions of human slaves. Finally, there's the possibility that they could see our planet as a prospective colony, or even as a place to which they might escape once their own planet is no longer habitable. While this is always hypothetically possible, again, I suspect there are ancient and more enlightened races out there that would protect us from such ne'er-do-wells. The even bigger problem such a race would have, however, would be in finding a planet upon which they could survive. After all, what are the chances that Earth would possess the proper atmosphere, gravity, climate, and other environmental elements necessary for them to find a home on our world? I suppose they could try to terraform the planet to their liking, much as they tried to do in the movie War of the Worlds. Cool movie, by the way. The remake, not the original. That one's still kind of cheesy. But that could take years or even centuries to complete. Further, even if that was their purpose and we puny humans were simply in their way, they wouldn't need to show up and start blasting everything to smithereens. If they really wanted to exterminate humans, all they would have to do is create and introduce a lethal pathogen into the atmosphere from orbit and wait a few weeks until we were all dead. Sort of the same way an exterminator gets rid of termites. That might not be as exciting as blowing up entire cities, but it'd be the most efficient means of exterminating any life forms they didn't want to deal with and wouldn't leave the planet intact and undamaged for future use. In the end, I suspect the best evidence that alien races are not out to conquer Earth is the fact that it hasn't happened. Reports of UFOs go back to antiquity and may even be the basis for many of the god mythologies out there, which is suggested by the History Channel program Ancient Aliens, which suggests that they've been here for a very long time. If that's the case, however, wouldn't it make sense that if an alien race wanted to conquer us, they would have done it by now? What would be the point of waiting until we develop nuclear weapons or even a primordial interstellar capability, which really could be problematic on some level, when they could have easily taken what they wanted when we were still comparatively primitive and technologically underdeveloped? It would be like the European powers waiting until the Native Americans invented gunpowder and learned how to forge cannons before deciding to conquer the New World. It just wouldn't make any sense to wait. Let's move on now, though, to a more positive perspective. Suppose aliens came here not to exterminate, enslave, or otherwise conquer us, but to save us from ourselves. There have been a number of ufologists speculate that aliens are afraid we're heading for our own extinction and that only their intervention can prevent us from doing ourselves in. While this is a commendable and far more positive rationale for the appearance of alien races coming to our planet, it fails on several levels. First, and perhaps most glaringly, how would aliens know what is best for us? Perhaps going through the many trials and tribulations we have endured on this planet for thousands of years is an important part of our maturing process, For them to tamper with it, then, might be the equivalent of tearing open a butterfly's cocoon in the quest to free the struggling insect, thereby dooming the very thing it is attempting to save. Hopefully, a highly evolved race would recognize the harm it would be doing by intervening, even in subtle ways. Second, as I stated earlier, there's that prime directive thing again. It's not unreasonable to assume there are protocols in place designed precisely to forbid any sort of interference, even if it might appear to be beneficial. As such, I suspect that unless there was some sort of imminent global threat to Earth, say like a planet-killing asteroid, en route whose path they could suddenly redirect without our ever knowing about it, alien races would be loath to take direct action to rescue us. I could be wrong about that, of course, but it seems a reasonable assumption considering the potential pitfalls direct intervention would likely entail. Of course, all this debate finally brings us to the overarching question here, and that is one of whether all this speculation is moot. Perhaps there are no spacefaring races out there, either malevolent or peaceful. For that matter, maybe we're the only sentient race in all the galaxy, or even the universe. And all this talk of alien threats is just so much baseless fear-mongering. I think that's unlikely, however. The universe is far too vast for our little planet to be the only one harboring life, a position even most scientists adhere to today, suggesting that life may not only be present throughout the cosmos, but is likely even ubiquitous. Plus, there is simply too much evidence that Earth has been and continues to be visited by extraterrestrials, even though their purpose for doing so remains unknown. As such, I think it's safer to assume a universe teeming with life than one barren of sentient beings, which, if true, makes the prospect that many of these races know about us and are even now actively observing us, and have been for some time, almost a certainty. In fact, I should be astonished if we aren't under near constant observation at all times, perhaps by several different races at once, all of them intent to learn as much about us as they can. Curiosity is a big part of our nature, and a trait I'm willing to bet we share with all sentient life, regardless of how advanced or primitive that life may be. So will we ever make contact with one of these alien races, be they friendly or otherwise? Some people say we already have, but haven't to date produced any hard evidence to support their contention. In any case, my personal opinion is that it's only a matter of time until they choose to make themselves known to us. It may not happen this year, this decade, or even this century, but it will happen, and that appears to be inevitable. I hope you enjoyed this little thought experiment, and if you're interested in whether alien spacecraft may have crashed on Earth and how one might go about recovering it, check out this video or click on the link below. Hey, I also have a related video on the obstacles to reverse engineering alien technology in case you're interested, also included in the description below. So if you like this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit that like button and consider subscribing to see more stories like this from our curious world. I'm new to YouTube and really need your help to get this channel to grow so I can bring you more wacky, weird, and bizarre stuff like this. So here's your final thought for the day. Remember, as they say in the X-Files, the truth is out there. I assume it has to be because it doesn't seem to be around here anywhere. Goodbye for now. Till next time.